some of these services. We do it on a cost-effective basis by being virtual. Our overhead is kept way down. So we're able to perform services at a cost ratio and basis that makes it very attractive to do that. And by using the internet, using the convergence of all the new communications technologies, we're able to do this anywhere in the world. So we invite you to call us, contact us, let us know how we can help you, and we would love to entertain your business as both a client or as a mentor or as a sponsor, and most importantly, as investors. I would say 99.9% of all the companies we see are looking for funding. How do I do this? How to attract funding? How to position yourselves to attract funding? And that's a large part of what we try to accomplish. So we invite you to give us a look and see how we can help you. We are part of a partnership that was established back in 2010 with the University at Albany and the organization called, in short, the Nanotech Center. And we have developed this partnership in order with sponsorship from New York State Energy Research Development Authority. Our goal back in 2010, at the end of 4 years, was to have 18 companies involved in iClean. I'm very happy to tell you that as of today, there are 26 companies involved in iClean, only 2.5 years into the program. So this has become very successful. iClean companies, which are primarily emerging technology companies located in the Albany, New York area within the confines of the university and the surrounding area in the greater Hudson Valley. It's a New York-driven program to bring energy efficiencies to New York State to help New York State meet its stated energy goals. iClean companies, as of today, have generated over $60 million in new equity funding for its clients. There are over 75 new employees, and it's growing, and it's working. And we're very happy to be in partnership with the university. We're happy to be an affiliate with NYSERDA. We're happy to be in New York, and we invite those of you who have needs, come see us. That's what we do, and that's where our strengths lie, and I think you'll be able to benefit. There is a website for iClean, and it's up on the screen right there. And we invite you to look at the website, check it out, check out who the clients are, check out who the partners are, see if it fits with something you'd like to get involved in and do. The basis for iClean is research and commercialization, taking research to that next level. Those of you that have been with us up to Albany understand the ramifications of that facility. They are far-reaching, it's growing, and you can get involved. Today also, I'd like to just give you some brief updates of some of our activities over the summer months. One of them is the addition of a company called Avivid. And Avivid is a water purification technology company. And just to give you a little blurb about what they're doing, there's a wide spectrum of water filtration applications which can be targeted by the Avivid system, including the very visible fracturing oil recovery process, arsenic removal from potable water supplies, plutonium recovery, and many other high-profile filtration challenges. The value stream comes from multiple sources, including the initial sale, consumables, and competitive technologies, but low manufacturing costs and service monitoring, and potable water requires continual quality monitoring, and that's one of the things that we're offering with this company. The company is in its early stages. It does have its prototype developed. The R&D is completed. So now we are in the phase of getting them commercially viable, getting the company funded, getting their business plans, marketing plans, financial strategies in place so we can go out and help them raise some funds to be competitive in this marketplace. I had the privilege to go to Colorado, where the inventor of this process is, a few weeks ago, and actually see the process in action. And it was very dynamic. And the people involved here are what I'll classify as good people, well-meaning, good hearts. This system can do wonders for third world countries where potable water is a real issue. And I think that's where a large commercialization component can come from, setting people up in industry, in their own business, in third world countries and second world countries to help deliver potable water to the masses. And I think that can be a really nice spot for them and for the company. Another company we brought on board this summer is called SunTrack Solar. SunTrack Solar is currently in pilot production with a low-maintenance tracking is the key word, solar thermal concentrator in a weather-resistant flat plate enclosure. SunTrack panels are highly efficient at commercial process temperatures from 140 to 250 degrees. Panel intelligence allows the panels to self-diagnose, adjust to temperature conditions, and communicate panel status to building control and monitoring systems. Each SunTrack panel is comprised of 6 parabolic mirror surfaces in a weather-resistant enclosure. These mirrors track and concentrate the sun's energy onto energy-absorbent collector pipes, and a water glycol solution is circulated to collect and store heat energy. This system has been on the market, although very low level, for a short period of time. They have several installations. A lot of them, thank goodness for me, are in microbreweries, which we got to see and test. Having a couple of beers before going on the roof to check out the systems was a bit risky, but we absorbed the challenge and fought through. Both the Avivid and SunTrack solar systems are looking and have become New York State companies. We are looking to not only commercialize, but sometime in the very near future, manufacture these systems here. And for the purpose of economic development in this region, these are Ulster County companies that have been established here in Ulster County, and we're looking to manufacture and distribute and commercialize these systems again from this region. So it's very exciting for us. We're very happy to have them on board. The other company that we brought on this summer is Solid State Energy Solutions. Solid State markets and distributes a general lighting product, LEDs specifically, which are currently manufactured in China exclusively for solid state energy. As confirmed by Constellation Energy, the solid state tube was 40% more energy efficient and produced 30% more lumens than those of its closest competitors. And Kaspersky really doesn't want me to do this. The company plans to establish at least 2 manufacturing facilities in the United States and specifically here in New York. The company's current products cater to the commercial and industrial sector. We took on this company after a lot of discussion, and one of the reasons was the primary executives in the company have a lot of experience in this area. There are several very large contracts that are on the horizon, and if we can get this thing up and running and going in the next couple of weeks, and that's what it's going to take, just a matter of weeks, we think this company has the ability to do some wonderful things, both in terms of sales, new product development, distribution, and yes, manufacturing here in New York State. So we think it's a wonderful addition to what we're doing. And in addition to some of our other clients, one of them is here this morning. You heard from back in July. Drew Gorman is here with RE3, and we're thrilled about RE3's progress and look forward to a little more in the coming weeks. Having said that, I wanted to introduce John Lonzak. John is one of our mentors. He's an excellent business guy, understands technology, understands business, understands what we're trying to accomplish. So I'd like him to spend a couple of minutes with you, just kind of giving you an overview on what he's doing, what he's involved with, and in terms of mentoring. John, come on up for a couple of minutes. I'm going to turn this microphone over to him, or I'll hold it for you. I'm going to have to stand next to you. How's that?
That's good. I could use the support.
I know. I'm here to support you.
There we go.
Very good. Watch this.
So anyway, thanks for having me here. Good morning. As Les said, I'm a mentor for HVCFI. I'm also on the advisory board at iCANny. And I'm also a consultant in the areas of branding and strategy and product development, inclusive of industrial design, corporate identity, strategy, positioning, and business development. Over the years, I've worked with Fortune 500s and startups. And while I enjoyed my worldwide programs with J&J and 3M and DeWalt, I really love the startup. I mean, that's where my heart is. And over the last 35 years, I've worked with a number and developed a few good strategies and methodologies to help them. Some of these things are drawn from experience of working with startups, and sometimes they're drawn from what I've learned in working with the corporate world, the Fortune 500s. I like working on these projects because I'm part engineer, part businessman, part marketer, part designer, and part project manager, and I can fill in any of those roles or assist in any of those roles at any given time. Not only have I started or have assisted with these startups, I've started several ventures myself and with others. So I know firsthand the experiences that startups are going through, individuals are going through, and some of the choices and decisions they need to make. So the other day when Les asked me to speak about my experiences here as a mentor, it stoked some deep-rooted thoughts, and I realized that I actually got started on this in the 7th grade, and
Go back that far.
And I guess I got a couple free subscriptions, and I don't know whether I was selling. I can't remember whether I was selling subscriptions for a school club, and I won them, or I was short a few, and my mother bought me a few. But I don't recall exactly how that happened. But I ordered a couple of magazines that I enjoyed reading in the barbershop. And these were Popular Science and Road and Track. And in retrospect, and this is all a recent revelation, that these have stoked a lifelong interest. The interesting thing is, by the time I went to college to study engineering and architecture, I had seen many better than sliced bread cover stories on the cover of Popular Science magazine. And in that 6-year period, I had seen only a few that moved from the artist's rendering on the cover to the new product review column inside. And as time went on, I noticed that it took 6, 10, even 20 years for these technologies to be realized into commercially viable products. And I often wondered why. Recently I figured it out. Inventors and even the writers, they fall in love with this technology, this product, this idea that they have, and they get stuck in that. And I always tell these guys, fall out of love with your idea for a little while, and into love with why anyone should care. Because if you can figure out why anyone should care, then you have something. Otherwise, you're just stuck with technology. So that's one of the problems I see. The other times people start believing their own baloney, and other times it's the result of trying too hard to sell their ideas that they lose sight, and they start misleading and in fact overpromising. And overpromising is the death of an idea or a brand. You have to deliver. You can never overpromise, and it happens. It's just human to do that. And so I try to help these startups stay in check, so to speak. So I see many great people and great ideas falter for all the same reasons. And in mentoring on the iCAN companies, I try to bring the experience that I've had in both big business and startups, and to help direct these new exciting technologies into commercial realities. You know, after all, I'm an idea guy, and I was paid to develop ideas and to nurture ideas for big companies, and I get a thrill out of seeing ideas come into fruition. So I try to work with these folks to help sell their ideas, not just to end users, but to partners and to investors. And sometimes that's a whole issue in itself. You know, do you focus on investors, or do you focus on partners, or do you focus on licensing? These are all different ideas that need to be reconciled, different approaches. You know, ideas are a dime a dozen, but it's what you do with the ideas that count. And that's what we do here at iCAN New York. And you know, I work with Les to help make ideas count and then to add up. So the first step we undertake in working with a company is to understand the idea and the technology and why it came to be, what has been tried, where it's at from an IP standpoint, from a production, marketing standpoint, from a competitive or financial standpoint. And once this status is understood, we start developing a work plan or a roadmap, how to get from where we are to where we want to go. And usually this involves a SWOT analysis and a bit of strategy on how the company can position itself relative to the competition. And competition is another, you know, big word I hear from startups all the time. They say, well, we have no competition. So, yeah, in some cases that's sort of true, but truthfully, the old status quo competition is there, and I bring that up right away. So status quo is your competitor, okay? The other thing is that I've discovered in my years of work that there are often people on different ends of the globe developing almost exactly, in fact, even exactly the same things at the same time. So that's another potential competitor. You may not think you have any, but I can guarantee you, you're not alone in your thoughts. Other people are thinking similar things, and you have to figure out how to be different. And if this still doesn't click with the clients, I tell them, look, you know, you need to define yourself, or else someone else might, and you might not like how they define you. So it's you know, that's the last line of defense about competition. But once the technology roadmap is clear, in the technology roadmap, we try to define, okay, how are we going to take what technology you have now and develop it into discernible, segmentable product areas that will each bring revenue. And once we figure that out, we develop a market plan on how we're going to actually sell that into the marketplace and even steps into the marketplace, into partners or VC, et cetera. You know, and most of the time, the technology roadmap and the marketing plan are developed simultaneously. I mean, my experience has been I might have started on one or the other, but while I was doing one or the other was being developed, you know, without my knowledge. I had all the information. So we also help, once we beyond that point, to develop a business plan. And beyond that, investor pitches, where we might develop a presentation that could condense 3 hours worth of rambling on an idea into 10 minutes. So the concept, the market, the opportunity, the cost are clearly delivered quickly, and then you could spend your time with your prospect talking about where you're going to go, what their interest is, et cetera, rather than just, you know, pounding your chest and yelling the entire time. And this process is sometimes painful and sometimes exciting, but most of the time it's painfully exciting. Reconciling these divergent objectives and needs and markets is really a challenge. It's a puzzle, and we enjoy helping you put that puzzle together. I enjoy assisting tech startups because I like working on new endeavors, and I believe that the U.S. economic future is dependent on commercializing technology. I mean, we may have conceded the factory floor to other parts of the world, but technology is still an area we can compete in. And by the way, I don't believe we have conceded the factory floor anywhere. Certainly on low-cost, mass-market consumables, that may be true, but we haven't. Some of the most technical things on Earth are made in the United States, whether they be submarines or sky labs or space shuttles or medicine or other types of technology. But what we need to do is help these technologists, these engineers, sometimes see their idea from a slightly different perspective. I like to say we need to push them over a few millimeters so that they can see what they're doing from a different perspective. And when we do that, we see great opportunities happen. I'm almost done. I was worried that this was, Les said you had 10 minutes, and I wrote this up last night, and I was thinking, man, this is only a couple minutes. So anyway, what we like to do is combine the engineering spirit with the marketing and business one, and often that's been oil and water, and from my perspective, in startups. And we do that in a manner that's respectful to all these different professions. So nurturing startups and helping them see opportunities and process is actually what we do, and we've done it before, so it's not our first rodeo. We can hold your hand, we can help you see the process. I found that the clients enjoy our process because, yeah, we ask stupid questions and we annoy them because they've been through this before, but by the end of the day, they're starting to think a little bit differently, and they're starting to see opportunities where they may not have before. We build this dialogue and develop a sense of trust, and we help them to get to the next business stage. It's fun and it's rewarding, and I'd be happy to work with any of you, put our heads together and find the needle in the haystack and bring home the bacon.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks.
Don't run away yet. Good job. So that gives you a little flavor of kind of what we do. We would love to have you contact us and contact John, and let's see what we can do. This past summer, there were two primary events that caught my attention in relation to entrepreneurs, emerging businesses, and longer-term effects. The first one was the IP suit, and that should be suit, not sweet. Sorry, my fault. By Apple against Samsung. I think that's going to have some significant ramifications in terms of intellectual property, who develops what, how to protect it, who can use it, who can't use it, co-development, as John mentioned. There are things going on all over the world. And what we would like to do here is, I think in November or December, we're kind of working out the details, we're going to have a panel discussion on intellectual property alone, all by itself. No other topics. And we're going to have some executives and attorneys and IP professionals come in and discuss this issue, because I don't think there's a more pressing issue than the protection of intellectual property, the development of intellectual property, and how to commercialize it without getting sued. And that's the issue. The second was a decision by SEC recently, which kind of came down very quietly a couple of days before Labor Day. Now, we had a guy a couple of months ago from Europe give a whole discussion on what he's doing in crowdfunding in Europe. And we found it very exciting, and I know he's making some great strides. They've done some exceptional work, especially where he's located, emanating from Athens, Greece. Talk about a challenge, that's a challenge. But they're making it happen. And here, we've got a major issue with SEC. And I'd just like to give you a very brief overview on what did happen and where this might go. I'm going to have to read some of this, so I apologize. I didn't memorize the whole thing. But some really disappointing news came out of SEC in late August that was designed to open the way for crowdfunding in the US. Rather than lifting the ban on general solicitation, and we'll explain what that means in a minute, in order to make it possible for more people, entrepreneurs and angel investors, to invest in American startups, the SEC proposed rules that would establish various different classes of investors, each perhaps with its own regulations. Needless to say, this move could make it more rather than less complicated for people to invest in startups, erecting new roadblocks rather than clearing the way for the old ones. How are we doing? There you go. There's the crowd. Now we need the funding. Okay. Some very quick backstory for those of you who assumed crowdfunding would immediately become legal when President Obama signed the Jobs Act into law back in April. The SEC had been given until 2014 to spell out the specific rules for crowdfunding. The very first step the SEC needs to take to make crowdfunding not only legal but effective is to change what are called the general solicitation rules. The SEC has strict rules about who can hear about a stock offering and how they can react to it. The change to those rules will allow stockbrokers and dealers to advertise stocks for sale to the public in ways that have not been possible in 78 years or since the SEC was created. The change is called lifting the ban on general solicitation. Lifting this ban will allow private companies to raise money from a larger pool of accredited investors, now and in the future. The last important term to understand is self-certification. And that's when an investor wants to make an investment in a private company today, the investment banker who sells those shares is required to make sure that the investor is accredited, which means they make over $200,000 a year in income or have $1 million in liquid net worth. Now, how do they certify this today? The investor signs a document that to self-certify that they have the level of wealth and understand the investment they're making. This form of self-certification is the only way to have a scalable model. Can you imagine if people were forced to submit tax returns or W-2s? No one would make investments in private companies. Way too much Big Brother. So, Wednesday, the SEC was tasked with answering the question, what do issuers need to confirm an investor is accredited? Rather than stick with the current self-certification path or providing a mechanism for investors to prove accreditation, the SEC said that different investors may need to supply the government with different information based on the type of investor they are. This is concerning because according to the law, there's only one type of accredited investor, $200,000 in annual income, $1 million in liquid assets. What the new proposed regulation did was make the rules harder to interpret by saying the verification of accredited investor status will change depending upon the amount, type of information, and the way in which the purchaser is solicited. Markets look for certainty before they act. The content of this proposed rule doesn't provide the markets with confidence, but instead creates more questions. Are you accredited? That should be a yes or no question. By muddying the process, the SEC will make it hard and confusing to implement crowdfunding investing, but easy for securities attorneys to sue entrepreneurs trying to create jobs. Uncertainty in markets will likely deter investments and reduce investor confidence. The result of this action will increase capital flows to securities attorneys and not to entrepreneurs. It makes many wonder if the SEC is engaged in a campaign to derail the will of the American people. The North American Securities Administration Association listing crowdfunding on its top 10 fraud list, even though in the 2 years that it's been legal in the UK and the seven it's been legal in Australia, not a single case of successful fraud has occurred. I remember the days of the penny stock market, which was a controlled industry. Stocks, some bogus, were some real, were sold by brokers solely on the basis of financial gain, not what the company was engaged in. I see the big difference here as investors can get involved in a company, a technology, or a philosophy that they understand and support. And genuinely, they want to help with the dual goal of self-interest and financial interest. Will there be fraud? Absolutely. But isn't there already fraud in the securities industry? It happens every day. Crowdfunding is an evolutionary process. It's something that's coming into its own. It's the discussion. When you look at other things that happen on the internet, retail, other industries that are dependent on the internet for their very existence, and the social and philosophical issues that we get into both as investors and as people, crowdfunding is going to be real. And I think we need to have the wherewithal to have the control, to have no fraud, to have it done honestly, above board, where investors can help entrepreneurs without risking their own personal security or safety. So that's my little spiel. And if anyone disagrees, there's a microphone here, or if anybody has a comment, we'd love to hear from you. Sarah is monitoring our webcast, and as people have questions, we'd love for them to comment as well. So if anybody has an issue with this, we'd love to hear you. I mean, we have a couple of securities guys in the room here. Are we on target, Keith? Are we? The SEC doesn't know what to do with it, and that becomes an issue. Anybody want to discuss that? Ralph, get us come up to the microphone. I hate to make you work for your breakfast, but you got to do that.
Is the issue on the political landscape yet? The presidential issues?
Absolutely. When President Obama passed the Jobs Act back in April, crowdfunding was certainly one of the major components of that Job Act. How to get money to entrepreneurs in a meaningful way where the majority of the money goes to entrepreneurs, not through several layers of bureaucracy.
Are there any candidates, senatorial House, that are carrying the ball for entrepreneurial position?
Ralph is our regional bulldog. If there's an issue that he can get his claws into, he's going to find it. So that's your assignment. Let's find out who's doing what.
And second question, how does this ruling affect Kickstarter, which is one of the webpage ways of, they're a crowdfunding mechanism?
Kickstarter is an excellent source, but I think some of their efforts are being thwarted by SEC right now in developing their whole business methodology, and therefore the same end result. We don't have money flowing to where the money is supposed to go.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. You got to come over there, Keith. You had a cup of coffee, you're going to have to work for it. Keith is one of our sponsors, by the way, with UBS. So
I think one of the problems is that we have that large Dodd-Frank bill that's going through Congress, and the SEC doesn't know how to handle that, to go after the main investment community, let alone worry about the little investment community.
But let me ask you a question. I'll pose an argument. If supposedly 93% of this country's economic growth is coming from small business, why wouldn't it deal with small business first?
I think the big business gets all the attention.
Well, we know that because they have the loudest voices.
So it looks better to go after Citigroup and UBS and Merrill Lynch and Bank of America for the mortgage area and what happened there, versus going after small business and trying to incubate new business and focus on that area.
It was interesting. I know this is going back a long way, but back in the mid-'80s, when I took my first company public, we were warned that there were going to be shareholder suits that came down. Sure enough, we were a low-price stock. We were public for 5 days when I get this subpoena handed to me by a process server. Some shareholder who didn't like what I had to say at our kickoff meeting sued me for $5,000. He owned, count them, 2 shares of stock worth exactly 50 cents. How do you deal with that? We had to pay the guy $5,000.
And then that goes on your record.
Well, you know, on my record, it went on the company's record.
It goes on your company's record.
Yeah.
A $5,000 suit goes
Exactly.
on your record.
And it turned out to be that we kind of nipped it in the bud from there on. But shareholder suits, suits from brokers against entrepreneurs for invading market space, loss of corporate opportunity, loss of profit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, are going to start to be a new business. How do we deal with that?
I don't really have the answer on that.
Oh,
because-
great.
But it's a big problem, and you know, we have to get the country kick-started, so to speak, and the money's not, you know, there's investors out there with money, but no one knows the rules. There's business people out there that want to bring their ideas, but they're not, you know, connecting, and I don't think the government's looking at that at all.
Yesterday I heard on one of the business channels that there was over $3 trillion of investable capital sitting on the sidelines. $3 trillion to me is a lot of money. And I'd like to see that money get into the mainstream. And I'd like to see this crowdfunding issue being dealt with in a reasonable, logical, and practical way that gets the money where the job growth actually is, and where economic development should be working hard and lobbying, yes, lobbying, to make some of that happen. What steps do you think we can take on a local, regional level to instigate some of this discussion?
I think it really evolves around working with banks, working with your local governments to try to help banks let go of some of that money, and it's all going to go back to the standards. If you're a banker, you can earn 1.5% in a 10-year treasury, free, you know, no risk. No one wants to risk their money right now.
So it comes back to risk. Always does, doesn't it? Always comes back to risk.
You know, Wall Street's been blasted a few times, and everyone is fearful, and it's a major fear out there. You know, it's easier and better to just do nothing than to try to do something and make a mistake again.
Absolutely. Keith, thank you very much for your insights. John?
It used to be sex cells. Now I think it's fear cells, huh? No, but it's hard when you look at that. And I was unfamiliar with the, you know, this issue on crowdfunding. But when you look at that in combination with the changes in the patent law, it seems, you know, there seems to be almost a direct assault on startups or smaller companies, and in a way, I mean, and I know this isn't 100% true, but it almost seems like there's some protectionism going on by companies, by large companies, to protect their turf. Because if you look at a lot of large companies, they're not necessarily developing new technologies at the rate that startups are. And in large part, a lot of products and companies are becoming a little obsolete, in my opinion, and they're hanging on. And what this is doing is thwarting competition from the lower end of the marketplace, the business marketplace, the patent law and this. And, you know, in a perverse way, I can't help but think that it's some sort of corporate protectionism that's been entrenched in our government. Just a thought.
Well, it's a good thought, and I think it's on target. But as far as entrepreneurs go, what this does, as we know that crowdfunding is in existence in Europe, is doing quite well in Europe, is doing pretty well in Australia. is doing really well in other parts of the world. If we fall behind in this area, we risk falling behind on that innovation curve for other companies in other countries to do what we're not able to do. So I invite you to look into this issue, how it might affect you as business people, or those of you that have designs on taking your businesses to that next level, or using crowdfunding as a funding medium, funding source in the near term. So that's it for that. Now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Della Rucker. And her topic is creating an innovation business ecology, enabling your local government to build its economic sustainability. Della advises across the U.S. about how to improve the local economies of communities by thinking about what they need to be successful places, but for decades into the future, not just for now, sorry. Her approach focuses on being nudged by my protection. I'll just turn it off. Della's approach to helping communities revitalize themselves goes far beyond traditional planning and economic development and lays the groundwork for a comprehensively healthy and sustainable community. Della's strategies make the best available use of the tight budgets that every local government and nonprofit organization face by helping the full cross-section of the community understand their issues clearly, identify their best opportunities, and work together. Della has provided planning and economic development into more than 100 communities, mostly in the Midwest. She is one of a handful of private sector consultants who carry the industry standard certifications in both planning and economic development. She blogs on economic development and planning issues at www.wiseeconomy.com and is a contributor to the Planning Commissioner's Journal and New Geography, amongst others. A native of the Cleveland area, we won't hold that against you, Della has an intimate personal understanding of the upheaval that changes in the economy have created for communities over the last 30 years. A former high school teacher and theater performer, Della has earned a reputation as an engaging and energetic presenter at national and regional conferences, including repeat presentations at the American Planning Association and the National Town Meeting on Main Street, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, amongst others. She lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, with her husband and 9 and 12-year-old sons. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Della Rucker. All right. See if I can get the technical stuff. Bless you.
He's going to work on the technical stuff.
I'm working on the technical
Do I need
stuff.
to turn on this mic? We will work on that. Is that on now? All right, that sounds good. Great. Well, thank you. While Les is fighting with his computer, who's his new best friend for today.
Right, the lower button.
Lower button,
Your slides.
lower button advances,
We hope.
and then we'll just hit a button if need be. So thank you. It was a fascinating discussion. That was actually, I was familiar a little bit with the SEC decision, but had not really kind of heard a great deal about it and not really heard any sort of in-depth analysis to date. So that was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you for the opportunity to come back to this lovely area of the country. It was a wonderful chance. Came across yesterday from a presentation I did in Pittsburgh. So got a lovely view of the valley coming in, and it's always nice to get back to this area. Let's see what happens when I do that. It moved. Hallelujah. Les is in the back going like this. We take our victories where we can get these some days, right? Exactly. All right. So that you have some sense of why in the heck I might be worth listening to, let me give you a little bit of my background. You heard about the Cleveland piece, which I didn't think anybody in New York would actually hold against me. Pittsburgh, I knew that was going to happen, but go figure. I started out life I have a very sort of quintessentially Cleveland sort of background. My father and my grandfather ran a paint factory, a small paint factory in a town in the Cleveland area that actually looks a lot like where we are today. This is not the factory, but it looks a lot like it. When I was relatively young, I was about 12 years old, that factory folded and was sold for its assets in sort of one of the first great dislocations of the transition from the industrial economy to whatever the thing is that we're in today. As a result, I think, of that experience, I ended up going, when I went to school, I eventually morphed. I've gone through 3 or 4 different careers, eventually morphed into a planner. For me, and I'm still a planner. In fact, I'm speaking at a planning conference next week, so I have to put my planner hat back on. But for me, the planning process was a little bit unsatisfactory because too often this was our situation. And it says we had a plan. Sadly, the plan was a bad one. As a result, I think, of that experience of growing up in Cleveland when I did, I always had a bent toward economic development and economic revitalization, which has been more and more part of my practice over the last several years. And again, when you work, particularly in the Midwest, a lot of the issues of economic dislocation, which I know you folks have dealt with here as a result of things like IBM for a very long time. It's a good thing I saw this little screen come up before, because the whole blacklist thing was starting to make me wonder if I was in trouble or not. So, whoops, that would be the backwards. This will be the forwards. So, as I have become more and more involved in the economic development end of the business, though, I also have become pretty frustrated with how we've typically done economic development particularly in the US, although we see this model carried out to a great extent across the world. And the conventional model of economic development tends to be focused on the big project, right? Does that sound like familiar territory for you folks? Economic development, you get their attention when you have a very large project, when you're going to build something that involves a big crane. And when it's a new something coming to town, then the reaction is, woohoo! We will give you tax incentives. We'll help you build the thing. We'll put in roads. We are rocking and rolling. We are ready to go. Conventionally, that's been the lion's share of what your economic development people are trained to do and are told is their job. Whether they're in a local government setting or a regional setting, whether they are within a local government proper or within a nonprofit. That's kind of the message that they have tended to get for a long time. And there is increasingly another little piece that I know a few people who are very excited about business retention, but the vast majority kind of look at it like this. Yeah, I know. We got to work with the people who are here. We have to help them out. Yeah, we know. Okay. Fine, all right, we'll go talk to them. Not quite the same level of enthusiasm. But what happens, and this is where my biggest frustration came in. Recruitment, I have some issues with the amount of effort that we sometimes put into recruitment in the economic development world. Don't hit yourself there, Della. I also understand the retention piece, resonated to that a little more myself, but felt like that wasn't being very effective and struggled with that for a long time. And what finally struck me was that the way your local communities have tended to do economic development has been the individual business focus. So they want to talk to you. They want to talk to company X. They want to talk to company Y. So it's a very, very linear kind of focus. What happens, though, we don't want to go that way. Let's go that way. That's a method that comes out of that old industrial revolution. It's a very mid-20th century sort of model. And it's a mid-20th century model in that, I would argue, it was set up for those big businesses. If your economy is made up of a small number of big gorillas, you can afford a very linear focus on this gorilla and that gorilla and that gorilla. It makes sense. It works. The problem is, as you folks know, we're just going to start pushing buttons here. The problem is, as you folks know, the world doesn't look like that previous picture anymore. It looks more like this. And in fact, even over the last 10 years, the average size of a business in the US has declined from an average of 17 people per business, which wasn't very high and was much, much higher earlier, in the 20th century. Just over the last 10 years, that average size has declined from 17 to 15 people. Over 10 years. It's an average for the nation. That's a substantial change. During the same time period, the number of self-employed persons went up by 14%. How many of you are self-employed who are sitting in this room today? That's, for those of you who can't see these folks, that's over half of this room. So if I had asked that question 30 years ago to a room similar to this, I probably would not have gotten that kind of response. So here's the premise. I think we need to look as people who are residents of communities, as people who work with communities, as people who play some kind of a role, whether it's as a business leader or as an official or as a member of a nonprofit or a leader of a nonprofit. We have to change how we're thinking about the very nature of doing local economic development. We need to do that in a manner that will not only make it more effective, but will make it more effective for organizations precisely like yours. And I'll explain why in a minute. But here's the catch. I work with economic developers. I work with planners. These are good-intentioned people. These are people who are working hard. These are people who, by and large, want to do the right thing. But they don't have your perspective. They don't see what you see being out there in the trenches. So the challenge to you folks is that we cannot afford anymore to sit back and let our economic development professionals, our local government professionals, do this work for us. We really have to be, as members of our own communities, as members of our own regions, we have to play a critical role in pushing forward that kind of change. Here's that virus thing again. I've never even heard of that one. Oops. Hang on for technical, we don't know what's going on here. Sarah, can you get less, please? Sorry about that, folks. The computer doesn't seem to, okay, wait, here we go. All right, we're Sarah, if you can hear me, we're okay. All right, so I've been pounding my head against this for quite a while. I still have some hair left, but it's been a little bit of a struggle. And what struck me, I'll put this a different way, is that we've tended to approach the process of growing local economies as an industrial process. Anybody know what this thing is? Ooh, bravo, gold star, you know your machinery. Yes, this is a paper mill. And I actually have some earthly clue how these things work because, we got it, Les, we're good. I actually have some clue how these things work because my husband used to run one for Procter & Gamble. He's had many jobs over his career, and in most cases I have no idea what he did. But when he ran the paper mill, I could say he runs a paper mill. And it's a lovely example of an industrial process because you take the slurry, which is the pulp mixed in with a lot of water, you shove it into one end of this giant machine that stretches about a city block, and this happens, and then that happens, and then that happens, and it pulls the water out and squashes the paper fibers together, and lo and behold, at the end, you've got a roll of paper. It's a very linear process. Things move through from one end to another. The problem is that we've tended to treat the key question of how do we make our local community grow, how do we create a viable economic life for our communities, we've tended to treat it as an industrial process. We input on this end, we put in money, we put in people, we put in businesses, stuff happens, and then out on the other end comes what we wanted, that wonderful quality of life. And anybody who tells you that economic development exists to generate jobs isn't telling you the whole story. Economic development, what's it really about? It's about making a place where people can live and thrive and be healthy and happy and make a living, right? Jobs are a way to get there, but it's about much more. Ultimately, economic development is about much more than that. So we've tended to think about it as this sort of input-output process, when in reality, it's more of an ecosystem. So communities thrive when the pieces interrelate to each other, when the structures reinforce each other, when there's enough flexibility in the system to create resilience, so that when you get hit with something like we got hit when I was growing up with the decline of the steel industry and the auto industry, when you get hit with that, you have the ability to bounce back. That's ultimately what we want for our places, right? Now you folks, and particularly you folks who are online, you're dealing in, as Les very clearly articulated, a global world. You're dealing with something that has to do with not just your local community. You are not dependent on your local communities the way, your local barber is. But you have this global community, and so that's certainly part of your ecosystem. And that's a piece that Les and iCAN are very equipped to talk about. My life is at the local level, and I can tell you that one of the things that so often becomes a barrier for small businesses, whether they're industrial businesses or service businesses or technology or kind of routine run-of-the-mill retail and the like, is that our ability to thrive independently depends on what the rest of the world around us, particularly in our immediate environs, look like. How many of you have ever had to try to hire somebody? A few. Okay. I got about half of the hands in the room raised on that one. If you're in a place, if you need somebody to physically come and be with you, which isn't always the case anymore, but still is very often, if you need someone to come and be with you, if you need to have a client come to visit you, you want to have a place that looks like somewhere where they want to be, right? That's a key challenge. And not every place can be everything to everyone. But that we underestimate the value of that local environment on our ability to be successful. And part of the challenge is whether we are an international business or a local business, we have a tendency to think of ourselves as cowboys, right? Is that not the nature of the entrepreneur? I'm on my second startup. This is my second business. In between my first business and my second business, I worked for a series of engineering firms. I was the planner, the economic development specialist within a planning group within an engineering company. And I ultimately left that environment, which was stable and lucrative. I have words, I do. I ultimately left that environment because I was too much of a cowboy, because I wanted to do things my way and in the way that made sense to my perspective. And that ran into loggerheads with the engineering company, bureaucracy, modus operandi. This is the way we do it. So, I understand and I get that as entrepreneurs, as small business owners, whether we are a global technology firm or we are a local firm that supplies services to that global business, that we have a tendency to want to be cowboys. But the fact of the matter is that we don't have the capacity to be cowboys. You don't have that capacity. I don't have that capacity. And the small businesses that you depend on in your local community for everything from your technology services to the people who do your dry cleaning don't have the capacity to be fully independent cowboys anymore. We're all cut too close to the bone. We're all doing the most we can with the least we can. We're all working as hard as we possibly can, and very few of us have any substantial slack in the system anymore. And that's a deep challenge. And that's a very deep challenge for economic developers because they don't have any slack in the system anymore either. So if your regional economic development folks are going to go around saying, I got to focus on this industry and this business and that business, they don't have the capacity to do that for everybody, and they certainly don't have the capacity, if they're taking it from that model, to do that for you. So we really need to shift the model. Shift the model of how local communities and regional entities do economic development from a I will work with you and I will work with you to the process of creating systems that reinforce each other, systems that can work together. You've got that through iCAN within this industry. That's very effective. You need that from your local communities as well. And my challenge to you would be, if you don't push them to do it, they're not going to do it. So what does that mean? Some of this, for those of you who have dealt with local economic development, is going to look kind of familiar. So think about this within that framework of how do you build a reinforcing system among all of the different kind of businesses in your community that depend on each other. What is it that they need? What is it that iCAN provides to you that needs to be part of the larger system? Well, one is the tool set. You folks have access through iCAN to some very extraordinary training and counseling and mentoring and resources. But you're not an island. You're dependent on your local community to some form or another. What kind of resilience, what kind of training, what kind of knowledge base do the local businesses that you need for your success, what kind of training and resources do they have? Let me show you a couple of particular issues. Every time I do that, it goes back to this. Da-dum-bump. Okay. Now I can't find the mouse. Hello. Let's say resume. We like that. Yes. Okay, there we go. All right. So what else do they need? Well, I asked before how many of you were self-employed. Everybody here know the term 1099er? Okay, I'm seeing a few of these kind of nods. You never see the nod on that one. You see the, oh God, yeah. Freelancer is the more conventional term for that. But especially in a region like this, where people choose to live here for certain amenities, where people may feel that they have to be here because of family connections or something like that, you have a 1099er economy that is a very, very significant part of what you need in order to have that vibrant economy. And that includes tax base, that includes services, that includes all of those things that I've described. Your average 1099er may not have the level of knowledge of how to survive in this world that you have. What do they need to know about how to manage their lives, how to manage their resources, how to manage simple facts like the fact that they don't have an employer providing them with health care? It sounds like it's their problem. My argument would be it's all of our problem. And I can't change the feds, I can't change the SEC, but I can work on building resilience into that local piece of the economy. Another is retirement. I heard somebody talking before we started today about retirement issues. If you think retirement is a tough issue for you folks, just wait until you start looking at the retirement issues associated with the local service providers. This guy owns a newsstand in London. This is not a life and death sort of business, but it's an important part of that community. And the challenge he's facing is, as he gets closer and closer to retirement, there's a sense that a lot of folks have that, especially if they have a brick facility, I'm just going to sell it. I'm going to get a realtor. I'm going to put it on the market. It's going to sell. I'm going to get this wonderful little pile of money, and off I go to my sailboat in Aruba. And in reality, it doesn't work that way. So for the self-interest of ourselves as people who are dependent on our local communities to some form or another, making sure that these kind of people can transition and not just leave vacant storefronts, I think becomes very, very critical for all of us. Here's a favorite one. Anybody know what this is? I doubt that you can read it too awful closely from where you are. It's mostly in, and this is only a part of the actual chart. This is the permit process for the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm probably going to get in trouble for putting this up on the internet, but okay, nobody can read it anyways. It's just got a lot of stuff, right? Okay. It's actually multiple permit processes that if you're doing this, you might need that and you might need this. I am not, because I'm a planner, because I deal a lot in the repercussions that one element of a community has on another element of a community, I'm not an advocate for let's wipe out zoning, let's wipe out regulations, let's wipe out permits, let's just let everybody do whatever they want. That is, from where I have seen that happen, that's death. What does so often become a problem, and I'm working on a project in Cincinnati right now where this is a critical issue, is that this process, not only is it cumbersome, and in this case we know it's more cumbersome than it needs to be, not only is it complex, not only is it time consuming, but nobody knows what the heck they're supposed to be doing. And so if we as people of a community can advocate, can push for this to be not just simplified, improved, streamlined, whatever, but made understandable to the person who needs to come in and get a building permit, get an occupancy permit, get a liquor permit, then we have an opportunity to lower the cost of doing business and make it easier for those very thin-stretched people that we need to function in our local economy to be able to do it. You're probably all familiar with crowdsourcing spaces. I had to explain this a good deal in Pittsburgh the other night, and I would have had to explain the antivirus thing too. You know, the ability to do co-working space becomes critical. In some communities, that's a much, much harder thing to do than others. If a community is resistant to this idea, if the local zoning and permitting does not facilitate this, then that becomes a significant barrier to certain kinds of businesses. Same with restaurants. And, you know, I'm in New York, so you recognize this picture. Tony Say, who's the president of Zappos and has been instrumental in trying to revitalize downtown Las Vegas, Nevada, said relatively recently that part of the reason why he wanted to relocate Zappos to this city, to downtown Las Vegas, was because in a city, every restaurant, every bar becomes a potential conference room. So we tend to think of restaurants and bars and places like this as this kind of little fluff, this amenity, this extra thing. And if it happens, great, and if not, well, yeah, the planners will tell you that the local residents are always yelling for restaurants. But, yeah, you know, it's not all that important. within the new economy, within that local ecosystem, they become incredibly important. Here's another little idea of a way that local communities can help to get people off the ground. Within the cities in this region, how many of them do you think have a farmer's market? Or a downtown market of some sort? Okay, pretty much everyone. This is the market in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's not just a farmer's market, it's an actual standalone market. And I know you have those in this region because this one was modeled on one in New York. This was built in 1850. It was pre-Civil War. I might have the date wrong a little bit. But Findlay Market was the first public market of this type on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. Within Findlay Market, there are somewhere between 15 and 20 stalls. These are startup spaces. In some cases, they're businesses that have been there for a very, very long time. In some cases, generations. But it also becomes a critical startup space. So here's my favorite example. This is a man named Jean-Francois, and he is a native of Belgium. He came to Cincinnati. I believe his wife is from here. No background, no connections, no nothing. No equity. Jean-Francois, who is now my son's, he was described as being 9, he's now 10, I need to update that. My 10-year-old's favorite person in the world. In fact, I told him I was putting him in this presentation, and he said, "Oh, the Taste of Belgium guy." And I said, "You got it." He started with a stall in Findlay Market that's no bigger than this podium, no bigger than this dais that I'm on right now. Made waffles. Low rent, low startup. Through your accelerator services here at iCAN, you're doing the same thing. Low cost way to get started. He now has, after about 10 years, a stall in Findlay Market, which is wildly successful, a stall in another city's downtown market, which is wildly successful, a food truck in another city, so he's now in 3 different cities, which are couple hours apart, and a restaurant now about 5 blocks from where that Findlay Market is that serves $30 plates and beers that you can't get anywhere else in that region. And he's doing extremely well. I haven't seen his balance sheet, but I tell you, the place is always jammed. He would not have been able to get to that restaurant without either having somebody, some sugar daddy helping him along, or without the opportunity to start in Findlay Market. You guys know this within iCAN. My challenge to you is your communities. You need these kinds of opportunities within your communities as well if your communities are going to support the places that you need for your business. Everybody familiar here with Babson College? That's in Massachusetts, up near Boston. This was a great quote from them. Entrepreneurs and others who put together the information. So all of this stuff I've been talking about to date is mostly about tools. It's information, it's space, it's simple things. Not only does it benefit the entrepreneurs, but what Babson has found is that in the process, entrepreneurs and other stakeholders in the system, so that's the whole community, learn to be collaborative, transparent, and proactive. And Les and I had a conversation about the role of government in solving economic issues. And I think he and I share a perspective in that no government's going to be able to make it happen. But what they can do, I would argue, is create and facilitate the process of getting that system on its feet. Quickly, a couple of other kind of more esoteric things. As we build networks build that ecosystem through information, through space, through these kinds of very basic level resources, what we really have the opportunity to do, but we have to be conscious about it, is to knit resources together, is to knit businesses into not just a bunch of businesses, a bunch of cowboys out there all trying to do their own thing, but to knit the businesses together into a more cohesive whole. Just like when you knit, when you physically knit, which I am incredibly horrible at. But when you knit, you take different segments of the yarn that are separated from each other, and you put them right next to each other. And when you put them right next to each other, you create something that is stronger and in many cases more useful and more flexible often than the individual piece of yarn by itself. What does that mean? Well, of course it means buying and selling, which is the piece that people usually default to first. If I buy your services and you provide me with my materials, we're like knitted together, kind of, aren't we? Well, yes and no. Businesses need to be able to share and have peer learning, and I'll show you another lovely quote from Babson in a minute. But that process of peer learning, of peer commiserating, you have that here. You have that online. You have that through iCAN. Your communities need that as well. And not just among technology businesses or retail businesses or whatever, but across that whole cross-section. How often do we learn best from people who are a little different from us? I'm going to gloss this part because you've obviously talked about crowdfunding a great deal lately. And I understand and I appreciate the concerns with the SEC. I do think that it's a matter of when, not a matter of if. This stuff is coming. So obviously you're familiar with Kickstarter. Let me point out to you a couple that are very, very new on the horizon. And I think the question's still out as to what they're ultimately going to look like. But this kind of thing is occurring. There's two new ones. One is called Brickstarter, and the other is called Small Knot. And these are similar to Kickstarter. They're crowdfunding platforms, but they're focused on the local level. And there was an interesting quote from the Kauffman Foundation, which is, of course, very heavy into entrepreneurship, talking about they have a program called iStart, which is essentially a kind of nascent crowdfunding platform. And here's the quote. I actually thought about putting it in and decided I would just verbalize it to you instead. As part of the explanation of iStart, Kauffman Foundation said, as a result of this tool, anyone can scan thousands of business concepts that cover everything from internet startups to consumer goods to green innovations. Thousands. Do you have time to weed through thousands of opportunities? And there's search functions, you can narrow it down. But that becomes very overwhelming. So as we look at these local ecosystems, as crowdfunding evolves, particularly in the US, but really anywhere, finding ways for people increasingly want to invest, people who are not traditional investors, who don't have a deep understanding of the kinds of technological work that you folks do, people like me who just want to have a better community are going more and more to wanting these kind of environments. So ultimately, what we're working on building here is interdependence. We are trying to create an environment in which you have the opportunity to benefit from everybody else, but where each individual business also understands that we have to be in it together, that we can't be cowboys anymore. So here's another quote from Babson. When different communities have different needs, different elements of your local economy have different needs, there's value placed in cross-pollination. And the strongest ecosystems, and this is about economies, not about birds and plants and things, support healthy connections across a variety of communities. I used to be told that entrepreneurs were like cockroaches. You put out the stuff they need, and they'll all just kind of come in from anywhere, and they'll grab what they need, and they'll run back to their corners. And I was told that by a very, very wise woman. And I've used that line for years. And I'm coming to the conclusion more and more that it's not quite that simple, that we need to facilitate that process. And we can't leave it just to local governments. We can't leave it just to local nonprofits. We all have a role to play in helping to advocate and push forward for that to happen. So thank you. I really appreciate your time this morning. Les, do you want to take questions?
Sure.
Does anybody have questions or comments? Yes, and you're going to have to do the mic thing again. Either that or I can repeat it, and then I'll work very hard on getting it wrong.
Who typically, in best case, should have the job of facilitating cross-pollination? In other words, you could say Hudson Valley Center for Innovation, iCAN, but what if the powers that be don't necessarily buy in or listen?
One of the things, I worked in Main Street, and the Main Street program in New York works a little differently than it does in many states. Main Street is a downtown revitalization strategy, and that it's been in place for about 30 years across the country. One of the things that Main Street figured out a very long time ago is that any kind of meaningful change in a community needed to be a partnership. It needed to have the local government as part of it. It's the local government has to be part of the equation. Local organizations have to be part of the equation, and communities. It really needs to be a collaborative process. That's why it's hard, and that's why so often it does not happen easily and happen quickly. It also takes time to build that combination and that collaboration. And so one of the things that I often see communities do, whether the impetus is coming from a local government or coming from a nonprofit or coming from somebody in the community who's just kind of got the fire in the belly, what I very often see is that person or that organization tries 2 or 3 things. You know, they'll do an event like this and they'll do it 3 times. And the first time 3 people show up, and the next time 2 people show up, and the next time maybe 4 people show up. And they go, this isn't working. It's not going to happen. Yeah, give up. Okay, try something else. So often we fail, especially in something messy and complicated like getting a local community to work in a sustainable fashion. We give up too soon. And so that process of building that collaboration, it's not easy. And sometimes there's personalities, there's history, there's baggage, there's particular individuals who don't get it. And then it becomes important to figure out, how do we work around that history? How do we work around that baggage? But it's that process of figuring it out that I think becomes the most important. And where it doesn't happen, it's almost always because somebody said, he's not going to listen. We tried that 20 years ago. It's not going to work. Not going to try.
Della, I'd like to come back to a little, I don't know if that's working now.
Nope.
I'd like to come up to a different aspect of your discussion. And that was brought up before, something called risk.
Risk.
Risk is a dangerous game that more and more economic development agencies and organizations have very serious trepidations about getting involved in. And as we discussed before, if the majority of new business creation is coming from small business, and there's nothing more risky on this planet than an emerging technology company trying to come onto the scene, take that part, coupled with, we know that by and large, technology companies today don't hire the amount of people that companies once did. They don't need the amount of capital that they once did, and their chances of succeeding to become self-sustaining are actually on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
What's the role of economic development? What do you think the role of economic development could be in working in the area of risk, entrepreneurship, and emerging companies, given all of those parameters?
That's an excellent question. And part of it comes back, I think the critical component of that comes back to that that paradigm shift that I have argued needs to occur within the very nature of how we conceive the job of doing economic development. As I said earlier on, we have this history in terms of local and regional economic development of focusing on the big project, the big thing. And when we focus on the big project and the big thing, we know there's going to be big demands in terms of cost, infrastructure, whatever, but we also know that there's going to be potentially some kind of reward. And we've got the history and we think we can project all this stuff out. And then, as you found out your neighbors in Rhode Island found out recently, just because you think you got it all figured out doesn't mean diddly squat. What I would argue this change to an ecosystem idea necessitates or creates is a shift from thinking about the big bets to the little bets. As you pointed out, the kind of businesses that you're talking about might be riskier, but they're also, the amount that they needed to risk is much smaller than it used to be. I was in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh the other day where I met with a man who used to be a funder for LISC, which is the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or Coalition. It's one of those. LISC is in most cities nationally. You've certainly got a LISC outfit here in this region. And LISC comes out of the community development tradition. Typically, they put money into the big impossible projects. They put money into the things that nobody thought would ever work. So they became the lender of last resort. What this gentleman found out, and he now is running an organization that he helped to get started as a investor, as the person who facilitated investments for LISC. What he figured out was that it was much more effective to put small investments strategically placed into initiatives and organizations that didn't need much, and that maybe were risky, maybe they were trying something new, but had the potential to do something that nobody else had been able to figure out how to do yet. And by doing that, he realized that I could take a risk. I've got lots of small bets out there. And if this bet doesn't pay off or this bet doesn't pay off, I'm okay. And that goes back again. I think as crowdfunding does get on its feet in the US, and I do think it's a matter of time. I think the SEC will do whatever it will do, but the pressure and the impetus is there, and I see it in the local communities at a furious, furious pace growing these days. I think that paradigm shift to, instead of the giant bets, to the little bets is going to greatly mitigate that risk. It's a portfolio diversification.
I don't disagree, but we had a great conversation on the way up this morning, and one of the analogies that I used is a hardware store. You don't see many local hardware stores anymore. You see Home Depots. Well, if I'm an economic developer and someone comes to me wanting to open a hardware store, and they say, well, how many people are you going to employ? And he says, oh, maybe a half a dozen. And that same afternoon, they get an application from Lowe's or Home Depot. Well, how many people are you going to employ? Well, maybe 300. The choice becomes clear. Where do you make that investment? Where do you put your eggs? How do you propagate small business if small business is kind of at the low end of the job creation scale, which everyone seems to be concerned about as our top priority?
Part of what happens there, part of what drives that perception is that we have a tendency to think that the Lowe's and the local hardware store would come out of the same pot of money and would have identical needs in terms of what they need from local economic development or community development, and they don't. If they come to the city and say, I need X, what Lowe's needs is going to be very different from what that local hardware store needs. But it goes back if you're dealing with an environment where the answer is jobs, 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 as I said before, I think that's a red herring. And it becomes incumbent upon us, we have to kind of force the change. We have to kind of force the widening of that understanding of what's important to the community to include a metric other than just jobs. And that's a hard sell. And it's not one that's going to happen immediately. But it will happen, and it can happen, and it does happen.
You know, within the last couple of years, a major retailer, Sears, as a matter of fact, said, how do we get more brand name participation in our stores? And what they did was, in the men's department, they licensed part of the men's department to Land's End. Now, that seems to be a major thing that's happening all over. I know Macy's does it. I know Lord & Taylor does it. Licensing space to smaller or affiliated companies and participating in their growth. I see that the participation phenomenon can spread very quickly given the impetus and the roadmap to do that.
Well said. Very well said. But
Anyone else want to chime in when we call this a day? Great. Della, you did a great job.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I've loved being able to be here with you.
I don't know if my microphone is working, so I'll kind of do it from here. Is this thing on? Yes. Is it on now? Cool. It's been a technologically challenging day. The rest of the day should be cake compared to what we're going through here. Okay, let me go. Yeah, well, Ohio could be cake compared to what's going on here. Okay. From the current slide. Okay. A few months ago, hey. Class. A few months ago, we had a speaker by the name of Jan Wallen, and Jan gave a wonderful presentation on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is, as far as I'm concerned, the business-to-business social media resource that we should all be engaged in. And Jan gave us a wonderful overview on LinkedIn, and we asked at that time who would be interested in a seminar on LinkedIn, and we got a lot of responses. Well, we're actually doing the seminar. We're doing it on September 27th, right not too far from here down in Newburgh. And to those of you watching, we can do this in your community too. Let us know. And Jan is here this morning, and we have some handouts for you, and we'd love to recruit you to come to our seminar. It's a laptop seminar, meaning you got to bring your computer, plug it in, and let's do it. And let's do it the old-fashioned way. Let's show you how it's done. There'll be breakfast served. The lab runs from 8:30 to 11:30. I would invite you to either speak to Jan or speak to Sarah about signing up for that seminar. We've got a great response so far. We're looking for more. And Jan told me yesterday she's got a new book that's just come out about this topic. And if you're lucky, you might get a signed copy of the book. So I invite you to speak with Jan. Can I just say a word? Absolutely. Come on up to that microphone and say a word. Can't do it from there.
Well, we do have a really good seminar coming up, and it's also some good incentives. The newest updated version of my book is now out. It's the 2013 version. If you've used LinkedIn a lot in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you've noticed a lot of changes. All those changes are updated now in the book. So I do invite you to certainly come to the seminar, and you'll get a copy of the newest book, both as an ebook and a hard copy book. And the flyers are right back on the table over there. We're going to cover a lot of really practical information. Those of you who've heard me speak or who know me know I'm very results and action oriented. So we're going to talk about, well, first of all, some of your goals. What do you want LinkedIn to do for you? What are you doing to build your business? And then we'll specifically focus during the workshop on that. And you'll have lots of time to really use it, LinkedIn yourself. So we hope you'll come.
I hope everybody comes out. Thanks, Jan. I appreciate it. That's it for this morning. If anybody has any comments, this is the time. Let's not forget Les's law on the new innovation economy. If you understand it, it's obsolete. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it, and we hope to see you next month. We have great speakers lined up next month, and we will see you then. Have a productive day. Take care, everybody.